From Melrose Arts, this is Art in Action, a series of live art demonstrations by prominent local artists. Working before an audience, the artists describe their process and answer questions about their technique. They show you their approach to art in a very personal way. From the art of encaustic, reverse painting on glass, fiber art, and calligraphy, it's all here. Sponsored by Melrose Arts, a volunteer group dedicated to encouraging the visual arts in Melrose. These monthly art demos are open to the public and free of charge. Today on Art in Action, artist Gregory Wright shows us how to paint with encaustic, the ancient medium of working with molten, pigmented beeswax. Gregory creates cosmic, microscopic, and underwater fantasy worlds in his paintings. His mastery of encaustic has enabled him to effectively express his imagery more than with any other medium.
So I'm here to demystify encaustic, give you some history about it, show you some basic techniques. It's got quite an exciting history to it that's been a part of humanity for a couple of thousand years. And basically what I'm going to do is give you some information about what encaustic is. And encaustic is paint. Okay? Oil paint is paint, acrylic is paint, watercolors are paint, enamel is paint, and whatever other paints that you use. Alkyd, pastels, cassine, I mean there's a million different types of paint. Paint is some type of a vehicle, binder, carrier with pigment, and you paint with it. And that's what encaustic is. Encaustic is made out of beeswax. So this happens to be right here, and I'll pass this around so you can touch it. This is cosmetic grade purified beeswax. Beeswax comes in many different colors naturally. It can be very yellow from pollen or from other plant detritus that's in it. This has been purified, not bleached but purified, which means it's put through a carbon filter and it's cosmetic grade because we use beeswax in many, many different areas of our lives. And you can see, if you know anything about the history, why the ancient Greeks painted in encaustic, because there's a lot of honeybees in Greece and in the Mediterranean, and honey played a huge part in religious ceremonies. It was a big part of life. It's a big part of the cuisine, and it's a big sweetening agent before the sugar came from the Arabs into Europe. So honey played a big role in many, many different parts of ancient history. Also, tree sap. There's a lot of trees in the Mediterranean that have sap, and they use different types of tree sap to harden the wax. So you have beeswax, and you have, this happens to be damar. Damar is tree sap from Indonesia. Okay, this is a damar crystal, which is a hardened tree resin or tree sap. You mix this with turpentine, and guess what you do with it? You put it over your oil paintings. Makes damar varnish. You use it like this, melted into beeswax. It hardens and gives shine to your beeswax. But this is what makes beeswax from, if any of you have beeswax candles at home, you know how you can squish them with your hands? It's very soft. This hardens it. Okay? So you have beeswax, damar, and then some form of pigment. All right, this is Mars Black. If I mix this with linseed oil, I make oil paint. I mix this with beeswax, I make encaustic. I mix this with acrylic medium, I make acrylic paint. I mix this with gum arabic, I make watercolor. It's pigment. Various types and manufacturers of pigment. So basically that's what encaustic is. The only difference is you have to use it hot. You have to use it in a molten state. So therefore I have a pancake griddle here, which keeps it hot and in a molten state so that you can paint with it. But it's paint. And it's beautiful paint. And I'm going to show you all the possibilities that you can do with it. So let's get going here. All right. So encaustic needs to be done on something rigid, okay, and porous. So if you can remember those two things, rigid, porous. Although this sort of breaks the rule about rigid, it's porous. Okay. But in other words, you don't want to take a stretched canvas on stretcher bars that has, first of all, it can't have acrylic gesso on it. And you can't paint it if there's going to be a bounce on it. So if you had a little tiny canvas that didn't have acrylic gesso on it, because acrylic will repel the wax, you could do a small encaustic painting on canvas. But anything, large like this where you get that bounce, the wax is going to go, it's going to come right off. So the preferred substrate would be wood. These happen to be birch panels. I just bought these thin ones for demonstration purposes today. I like to use cradled panels because they don't warp as much and they have some substance to them. So this is a cradled panel, and I have this prepared with some white encaustic on it so I can show you some painting techniques in a minute. But you want to have, like I said, a porous surface to work on. Now, if you don't like to paint on straight wood, say you want to do something very translucent, you would need some sort of a covering on this. And they do make products, which I didn't happen to bring with me, encaustic gesso, which is very, very porous. Okay, so it's not acrylic gesso that you buy, in the regular art supply store. It's encaustic gesso, and it's extremely porous. You could use that. You could glue with archival glue. You could glue like a porous paper, like a BFK, or a drawing paper or something like that on, and then use that if you wanted like a white background to paint on. Some people, those of you that are oil painters that like that white, some people like dirty canvases, some people like to paint opaque, some people like to paint translucent. It depends on, again, your technique. You want to work with wax that's between 180 and 200 degrees. Okay? When you work with wax that's hotter than that, it starts to burn. It starts to smell sour and acrid. All right, another important part of encaustic is the fusing. That's what makes true encaustic encaustic. And fusing simply means that you're melting the wax into its underneath layers. So you have to melt each layer into each other, otherwise they separate. So it becomes one mass with the substrate. So that's another important aspect of encaustic. So we have different ways that we can melt wax, or fuse as it's called. I use a torch. So I use a propane torch, my favorite thing. This is a butane torch, and I will be using them in a minute. And this is a heat gun. And also we have an iron. So you can use a tacking iron, or anything, a travel iron, anything that heats up. Be creative. You can use an old flat iron or curling iron, an old clothing iron, whatever you have, anything as long as it's heat. And the ancient Greeks used hot metal tools heated on coals. So, if you want to go to that extent and be a purist, I haven't even done that yet. I haven't even got to that point. All right, so let's show you how this stuff works. All right, you should usually or almost always use natural bristle brushes, because why do you think?
They don't melt.
Because plastic bristle brushes melt. And you want to keep your brush warm, so that's why I have them leaning on my palette. Okay, and this brush is dirty, so you never wash encaustic brushes. You try to use the same color family all the time with that particular brush. If you do want to clean a brush, I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, other types of wax will clean your beeswax off. I'm going to prime my canvas with encaustic medium, and I'm going to just try to find a clean brush here. Let's see what we have. That one's pretty clean. Okay. So encaustic medium is simply beeswax and damar. I use 85% wax to 15% damar ratio because I make my own medium. You can buy it. Then you don't even have to worry about that. I like it stiff, but not too stiff, because if you have too much damar, it's very brittle and it can go, but it makes it very shiny. Okay, so I'm going to load my nice big hockey brush here up, which is bigger than my pan, and I have a nicely melted medium. I have it about 200 degrees. So you want to load your brush, dip it off, and then you want to stroke it on. Okay? That's what it looks like. And it will harden almost immediately. Okay, now if you start going like this, you build texture. Okay? So if you want a nice smooth coat, you load your brush it off, and you apply. Now,
That's wax and the
this is medium. Now, if you want to paint upright, you're going to see what's going to happen, right? Okay. So it doesn't work. So you go like this, and you're going to get, see, you work flat. So you can imagine if you're doing a large painting, it's a little difficult because you have to paint something and put it up, put it down. You know, it's a lot of muscle work. So generally what I do is, if I'm not using a gesso, or even if I have an encaustic gesso underneath, I'm going to do a nice clear coat on. So what this does is it fills in some of the porosity of the wood, and I'm ready to paint. I'm just going to find a clean spot for that right there. So now the next step would be to fuse. You want to melt this into your wood. Okay? So I'm going to use my propane torch and light it. And you can adjust this to be very delicate, or you can blast it. So guess what happens when you blast it? The wax goes all over the place. When you're delicate, it's very delicate. So you have a choice. I call this a fire brush because you have a choice. You can be gentle or you can be crazy. Again, you want to be careful because it's fire and plastic melts and paper towels burn and my iPhone does not want to catch on fire. And then what you want to do is gently fuse. What I'm doing is I'm remelting. And obviously I cannot do this upright because it's going to drip right on the floor. But what I'm doing is I'm gently remelting this, and I can keep going until this is perfectly smooth like glass, or I can just warm it up and drive it into the wood a little bit. So that's all I'm going to do.
That's fusing.
That's fusing. That was one way. I can also take my iron and I can fuse like this. This gives a whole different effect. This gives a swirly effect. And when I put some color on here, you're going to see that in a minute. Let me wipe that off for you.
And how long does that take to be dry?
Couple of minutes. See, it's already dry. There's a wet spot. Well, it's not really wet. It's molten. So there's a molten spot right there. It's going to harden. So if it's still molten and you go like this, you're going to have a big divot in your painting, and it's going to be a big drip, which everyone does that at first. Okay, so let's do some color. So now this is warm, so it can receive. You don't ever want to paint on cold wax because it won't adhere properly. So now I'm going to use this, again, my brush is a little bit dirty, but it's okay. A very light blue-green here, blue-green mixed with white. So now I'm going to apply very gently. And you can see I have a dirty brush, but that's okay. So you get the idea. You can get beautiful. Now see where that little divot was in the middle? So I'm getting a lump. So I'm not getting like a pristine surface, which I never want anyway. So I like things textural. Okay. So now if I decided to paint like this, you can see I'm building, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm starting to build texture. So you saw me painting very, very carefully and very, very smoothly, and then also you can paint sort of texturally. Now as you build up your layers, now you have a choice. You have to think, do I want to preserve what I've done, or do I want to blast it? So let's do both. So I can be very gentle. So now I'm just fusing to the underneath layer. So I'm just warming it up a little bit. It's liquefying. It's combining with the underneath layer. And I've preserved what I've done for the most part.
So each layer, do you need to do that?
You need to do this with each layer. Okay? And that binds it to each other. Okay. So now I've maintained that texture. So let's say I don't want to do that, and I'm getting a little wild now. Now I can blast this. I wish you could. I'm going to try to do this. And I can manipulate the wax around. I don't know if it's liquefying now, and I'm pushing it out with the. Now I'm going to get a whole different thing happening here. All right, let's let that cool off, and then you can see. All right. And I'm going to show you with that whiteboard. I'm going to let this cool, and then I'll pass it around, and you can get an idea of the feeling of it. I'm just going to let it cool down. Okay, so here's a board with white. It's a little textural, so it's ice cold, hard as a rock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm it up gently right now. So I'm going to warm it up, and now it can receive some more wax. Okay, so let's say I want to do a defined painting. All right, so I'll have my warmed wax base. This is like a neutral white base, encaustic. Okay, and let's make a little painting. So I'm going to make some shapes here. So I want to. Oh, so this is what happens when you have your board up. So I'm just going to paint something on here. I don't know what, but little swirlies. I like to make little swirly things and germ-like microbes. That's what I paint. So, all right. So I just made these little things. Now I'm going to fuse it gently. So I want to maintain my shapes so I can maintain my painting. So now it's fused on. So I can hang this up now on the wall if I want to. But we're not going to do that. We're going to continue. So now I want to add to it. Maybe I want to build up the layers so I can paint over it now. This is very translucent, so it's not going to really show, but maybe I want to do other things here. So see how I'm using a very translucent red? So there's different effects. Again, just like any kind of painting, you can paint very opaque and dense. You can paint very translucent. If the wax is still warm and I'm working on one area, it'll self-fuse a couple of layers. But if I'm painting over here and I go over here and I want to go back over here, I have to warm it up. So that's something you get a knack for after a while. But it will, if you go layer upon layer, like right at one after another, it'll self-fuse a little bit, and then you can do a big fusing at the end. So another thing you can do with wax that's really exciting is you can scrape it and carve it and then size it. So, or if you don't like something, you can get rid of it. So here's some pottery tools, and say I wanna really like go into this, which actually looks really good. So right in here and carve it like that. And then, and you can save these, by the way. So I can save that stuff that I scrape off. All right, so now I've scraped this back. Now I can, let's get some green going in here. So now I can put some green over it, and then I can fuse it. I'm just showing you all the possibilities. So I can fuse it and maintain. Okay, so I've got that now. Very interesting. Now I can also manipulate. So I can get it all liquefied and really interesting. And I'll show you that in a minute too. All right, so see how I swirled that? So I destroyed so again, you get wild with it or you be controlled with it. Now I can go in, here's you know those scratch boards, the black ones? This is a scratch board nib. So I can go in, I can write things, let's just carve lines. I can carve down to whatever level I want to carve down to. So I make lines in it. I can also carve things in. I'll show you some interesting techniques. So I can carve some lines or whatever shape I want to carve in, and then I can fill them in with wax and then scrape over it. Oh, someone's calling. You'll see I filled in my incised lines with wax, and now I'm carving back. And you can, those of you that like to draw, stuff like that. This is, let's get rid of that. So you can do that. And also, what I do a lot is I accent with oil paints. So I'm just going to carve. How about if I'm just going to write my name up here. I know that's really hokey, but I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to write Greg so you can see it. Okay, and then you can take your incised areas, apply oil paint with a brush. Pretend this is a brush. You know, put it in, and then take a cloth and rub over it. And you can accent texture. All right, so here we go. This is indigo oil stick. Okay? So here's my name up here. All right, let's get the skin off of it. All right, so I'm going to rub that in. And let's accent everything. Okay, here we go. Ooh. All right, and then let's... Oop, I'll pick that up after too. Okay. All right, so you can accent with oil. And if I had a brush with me, which I didn't bring any of my oil brushes, but you know, you would work it into your incised lines really well with the brush, and then wipe it off, and then you get a really great effect. Of course, what do you think you have to do to it? You have to fuse it. So you can be gentle about it, or you can be crazy about it. And I went a little crazy so you could see. So you can get these. Again, I'm just showing you effects. I don't always paint so messily. So you want to make sure that it's dry. Fusing does help. But if you use really, really oil-rich colors and you bury it, you'll have a problem. So I could take graphite, charcoal, colored pigments, rub it in, wipe it off, fuse it in. You can get great effects doing that also. Because once the pigment blends with the wax, it becomes encaustic paint. Okay? You just have to remember that you can't like do an oil painting on top of the wax and just leave it there, because it won't last. It has to be melted into it. Okay? So you can incise, you can build, you can scrape. I'm going to do a collage for you. But I'm going to do it because I didn't bring any paper with me. So there's a couple of things you can do. Again, your nice, clean, heated palette is a great tool. Right, so here's a piece of paper. Now, this is how it looks. Now, if I put wax on it, it turns into another fabric, which is really cool. It actually becomes translucent. Okay, so now look what it turned into. It's actually beautiful. So this could be a piece of art. I mean, you could do whatever you want with it, right? Or you can start collaging. So I would have a warm surface. So let's jump gently. All right, so here's a nice warm surface. So I have my piece of paper. So now what I could do is a couple of different things. I could take a spoon, and I can We'll rub this into. So now I'm starting to collage. I can very gently heat this up. Come on. There we go. Very gently. Remember, it's paper. It's not going to burn that easily, but it's still paper. Okay. Okay. Oh, that actually looks really beautiful. So, okay. So now I can take another piece. Coffee filters, tea bags, Japanese papers, Subway napkins. Beautiful, you know those beautiful napkins that you buy now with the pad. Oh, you can make beautiful things with those. You can use any natural substances, leaves, branches, berries, as long as they're dry. Flowers, but they have to be dry. You can use things like that as long as there's no moisture in it, because moisture entrapped in wax is going to do what? It's going to grow mold and bacteria, and it's going to erupt. Okay, so now I can layer. Let's say I want to do this, and you'll rip it, and you'll do all kinds of things, and it'll come off like that. And you can also use your iron, which is a great way to fuse collage. Use the tip. Yeah. I mean, who would know that was a... It's pretty good. All right. Let's do this now. This will be fun. Because what happens a lot of times with napkins is the backgrounds disappear. So I'm just gonna warm this up. Okay. And then I'm gonna put on my Subway napkin. Thank you. And we'll use the sun ray. Okay, that'll be good. Okay, so let's get rid of some of this paper. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Let's put that right there. So I'll lay that down. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to apply wax over it. Now the white's going to disappear. So you're going to see that. And we're going to be left with words in the sun ray. I'm not going to cover it all so you can see what happens. So now I can keep burying this. I can make this very foggy and sort of nebulous, which is fun to do too. So I can bury it and then apply more things over it. So this is what the paper looks like, and then there it is covered in wax. So now what you want to be careful of doing, now I'm going to light, it's going to burn so you can see. Okay. So you get some ash in here too, which is always fun. Yeah. So we get a little bit of burnt paper in there. I can bury that, but so that's some collage that you can do. So we did collage, we did incising, we built up, we lit things on fire, we fused in 3 different manners. Again, use your imagination. That's the best thing I can say, and be safe. And you'll have a wonderful time.
Gregory Wright has demystified and shown us some of the basics of working with encaustic to incorporate a sculptural quality in a 2-dimensional format. Be sure to check Gregory's website, artgw.com, for further examples of his fine work and to learn of upcoming shows and classes. Visit melrosearts.com for information about Melrose Arts, upcoming events, and future Art in Action demonstrations. Melrose Arts, dedicated to encouraging the visual arts in Melrose.